To be or not to be? That is the question. It's a line so popular it's almost cliche, but you might just wonder, why? Is Shakespeare just overthinking his life choices? Or perhaps trying to ham it up a bit?
Got it!
Hamlet? Never mind. Within this simple line lies a profound truth that modern storytelling seems to have lost. The power of choice. You see, the hero's journey is more than just an adventure. It's a confrontation with fate, a struggle to reconcile internal drives with the world around us, the existential weight of the decisions we make. That's the essence of classic storytelling, from the Greek tragedies to the Romantic era to the golden age of Hollywood. Why am I telling you this pish? Well, if you look at the stories of today, you'll notice something a bit unsettling. Tragedy, as we once knew it, is disappearing. I mean, can you name a great tragedy from the past 10 years? My point exactly. Today, we've got more superheroes than a kid's costume party, but life isn't always a fairy tale, is it? What about stories that aren't all sunshine and rainbows? What about tales that don't end in triumph but in hard lessons learned? Somewhere along the way, we've lost the stomach for tragedy, for the stories that force us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own nature. Instead, we get a clusterfuck of sympathetic villains. Everywhere you look, stories are bending over backwards to make us sympathize with the characters who once embodied evil. From the Joker to Cruella to the family-friendly orcs of Rings of Power, these once symbols of darkness are now portrayed as poor, misunderstood victims of a cruel world. Because when I watched the Joker blow up an entire hospital in Dark Knight, I thought to myself, is his mental health okay? So what's with our sympathy for the devil? What happened to true tragedies focused on inner turmoil and the choices we make? And more importantly, what does it say about us? Well, strap in, fellow journeymen, because today we complete our descent to the dark side. The Romantics got it, dear viewer. They didn't see heroes as mere passengers on life's journey, but as captains of their own fate. Sure, fate throws curveballs, but what matters is how the hero reacts, how they confront the world and their inner turmoil. It emphasizes agency and personal responsibility, the primacy of choice. For them, the passions that drove people to act were inseparable from the choices they made. But it's not just the Romantics who understood the weight of choice. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, knew a little something about suffering. He famously wrote that while we cannot always control our circumstances, we can control how we respond to them. Frankl argued that the true source of our strength lies in our ability to find meaning in suffering, to rise above despair by choosing purpose even when faced with the most brutal realities. Frankl's ideas on the freedom to choose our attitude in any situation offer us a kind of personal agency that's far more powerful than any superpower. He saw that it's not the easy, happy endings that give us strength, but rather our ability to face our own darkness and still choose to create meaning. Good stories are much the same. They confront the hero with a choice, purpose or despair, transcendence or succumbing to the shadow. Think of Hamlet, pacing back and forth with his infamous indecision. His tragic flaw isn't his circumstances, it's his inability to confront his own inner conflict. He knows what must be done, but hesitates, getting lost in his philosophical musings, to be or not to be. This, dear viewer, is the essence of tragedy. It's a brutal but necessary reminder of the consequences of failing to confront our darker selves. Villains play a similar role. After all, what are villains but the tragic heroes in their own story? They're often depicted as disfigured, disabled, or otherwise maimed. Darth Vader walks around in a giant mechanical lung. Captain Hook has a hook for a hand. The Phantom of the Opera hides his deformed face behind a mask. This isn't an accident. It's a cautionary symbol of what happens when we allow our pain and suffering to define us. But what about today? Well, tragedy has been all but stripped from modern storytelling. Characters like Joker, Venom, Cruella, Sauron, and God knows how many others are elevated as misunderstood figures to be sympathized with. Take Kylo Ren from the Star Wars sequels. The film is constantly inviting us to sympathize with him over his troubled upbringing, his feelings of abandonment, and his struggle with inner turmoil. Perhaps it's only natural that he went on to lead a fascist regime, commit mass murder, and personally execute his father.
I think I can smell shite.
Or take the Joker from the recent standalone film. We're invited to sympathize with him, seeing him as a product of a cruel society. I guess it's fair enough that he murders 3 men in cold blood and shoots Robert De Niro in the face.
Right.
Instead of wrestling with moral conflict, he simply descends into violence, unchallenged by any deeper self-reflection or remorse, and the movie hopes we won't notice. Fuck off, film. A real tragedy demands more: struggle, moral ambiguity, and the weight of decisions. By asking us to empathize with these villains, we end up excusing choices that, in classic storytelling, would have tragic consequences. Instead, modern storytelling infantilizes them and robs them of their mythic resonance. When we turn them into victims, we strip the story of the moral clarity that gave it its weight. We turn a symbolic struggle against darkness into the surface reality of a petty squabble. This, dear viewer, a good story does not make. This trend in modern storytelling reeks of arrogance, a sort of intellectual snobbery that asserts moral superiority. It suggests that traditional narratives are too simplistic, implying that only this enlightened view can grasp the nuance of characters originally designed to embody evil.
Well, that's definitely shite.
The reason for this shift is obvious. Everyone's a victim nowadays, whether of the oppressive patriarchy, the remnants of colonialism, cisgenderism, ableism, or even an oppressive woke culture. Everyone gets a trophy. The issue with this is equally obvious, and listen good, dear viewer, because this one's important. Just like in stories, victimhood robs us of our own agency, our own ability to discern right from wrong. It encourages us to excuse any behavior and shift the blame to a wider society that we see as unjust and unfair.
You know, we're living in a society!
Meanwhile, we live in the most just, fair, and empathetic time in human history. Hell, that might even be the problem. You see, empathy is good, but not necessarily when it's elevated above all other values. Empathy isn't a principle that can be used to determine right or wrong. In a world of victims, the inevitable question is, empathy for who? Do we empathize with Anakin Skywalker, torn between his loyalty to the Jedi and his desire to save Padme only to fall to the dark side? Or do we side with the Jedi, who embody peace and discipline despite their challenges? Do we sympathize with Sauron, a poor, misunderstood, lovesick Maya who just wanted to restore Middle-earth to its former glory? Or do we acknowledge that at some point, choices matter? See, every argument has two sides, and taking any side means empathizing with one at the expense of the other. Empathy isn't a tool for navigating the world, it becomes a hollow defense of any worldview, no matter how destructive. That's how you end up with Sauron having a cry and Kylo Ren having a little temper tantrum. A truly compelling villain should challenge the hero's values, not mirror their flaws. It's not sophisticated, it's completely bananas. So what to do? Well, dear viewer, the fact is that empathy, like all virtues, must be tempered by tough love, responsibility, and accountability. Empathy is earned, and we earn it by making the right choices, not in the absence of adversity, but in the face of it. The Romantics got it, dear viewer. To be or not to be, that is the question. To stand on our values and enact our own vision of the world as an act of defiance against overwhelming darkness, or to wallow in self-pity and victimhood. To recognize our own inner darkness, confront our shadow and rise above it, or to be consumed by it. When we sympathize with the villain, we lose the richness of this moral struggle. True empathy doesn't just excuse, it challenges. It demands honesty and accountability. Hamlet's fall, Macbeth's ambition, Anakin's betrayal, they don't deserve our pity, they deserve our reflection. Ultimately, dear viewer, this is what makes tragedy so powerful. Just as Viktor Frankl said, it's not about suffering, it's about the consequences of our choices. Tragedy isn't a lesson in victimhood, it's a reminder that in the face of darkness, the choices we make matter. We need tragedy because it teaches us that our lives are more meaningful and our stories are better when we hold ourselves accountable. And that's a lesson we should never forget. Anyway, that's all I've got. If you've enjoyed this, like and subscribe.